Hey Michael, can you hear me? Awesome. So can we get the PowerPoint presentation up?
Hot?
Yes, I can hear you.
How do I sound?
Pretty good. So we're both live on YouTube right now. So I just need a PowerPoint presentation. Mike's working on it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put myself on mute, and then when he comes in, yes.
What? Testing, testing. You there, Rahat?
Yeah, I'm here. Just working on that live stream for YouTube.
Okay.
There's
I'll
like a sound lag, and there's just like a little bit of repetition. It looks like the
well, I'll just sit to the side here and review my notes. Thanks. Brendan Davey here, testing audio. YouTube stream. Audio testing. Testing from Asheville, North Carolina. Rahat, can you hear me? Rahat, you are muted. Rahat says, sounds good, thank you.
Yeah, I hear you.
Rahat says, sounds good, thank you. I just heard that echo. That was weird. Brendan Davey, Asheville, North Carolina. Speaking, testing YouTube live stream. Still testing. Testing 1, 2, 3, ABC. Testing is now concluding.
Good morning. This is Mike. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3.
This is Brendan. I can hear you.
Very good. Good morning, Brendan.
Good morning.
Wow, that's pretty delayed. Okay.
So from there, Rahat, do you have any? Rahat Ashik is our facilitator today, and he's the wizard behind all the webinars we've been doing. So Rahat, do you have any additional instructions for any of the folks in the crowd?
Not at this time.
Okay, great, thank you. So from there, I think we'll turn it over to our director, Mike Abrazinskis.
Thank you, Michael, and good morning, everyone. This is Mike Abrazinskis, Director, Division of Air Quality. Thank you for joining us this morning. This is an important topic, and so we appreciate you spending some time with us. This topic, and that is updating our Title V fee structure, is something that if you've heard our division give summary updates at our outside involvement committee meetings or at the NCMA air quality workshops or the environmental health and safety school or at CAPCA over the last year and a half, you might have heard me mention that at some point we're going to have to look at adjusting our Title V permit fees. And so that time has come. We have pretty much put it off as long as we possibly could. And so that's what this is all about today, is to share with you the process that we're going to be working through and get your feedback about that. So again, as Michael mentioned, my colleague Brendan Davey and I are going to lead you through this presentation. Presentation is 40 slides long. We ask you that you hang in there with us. Slide 38 of 40 actually has the proposal, okay? But there's a lot of information we want to share with you today to help you understand all the information about the background and why we need to do this. And so thank you very much again for attending. So again, this is an introductory slide with some of the topics we'll cover today. Again, it's a comprehensive presentation on this topic, and that's really a reflection of all the work that our divisions put into this over the last year already. And so we've been pulling together data, we've been looking at workload, we've been studying how other states have recently gone about changing their Title V fees, and we've been visioning and developing a meaningful and diverse stakeholder engagement process. And this webinar today is an important step in that stakeholder engagement process. You're going to hear about a stakeholder focus group process that occurred back in May and June as part of this presentation, and that led to the recommendation that we'll present here today, again down on slide 38. Okay, so let's jump right in with some additional introduction and background about the Title V program. And this is important background. The Clean Air Act requires each air agency to collect fees that are sufficient to cover all reasonable direct and indirect costs required to develop and administer its Title V program. Now, there are implementing regulations that US EPA has put into place in 40 CFR Part 70. And again, there's a lot more detail there that helps steer air programs as to, okay, well, what are examples of those reasonable direct and indirect costs to develop and administer the Title V program? And that includes preparing regulations regarding the permitting program, the implementation of those, and the enforcement of those. It, of course, includes the review and taking action on permit applications. It includes the administrative costs of running a permit program, even the IT systems that we build to track and house information about permits and facilities. Compliance certifications, it covers data entry. It covers outreach and public participation processes for permitting. It also includes implementation and enforcing terms of a Part 70 permit. So that's basically our inspection and compliance program. It covers emissions and ambient monitoring, modeling, analysis, demonstrations, preparing inventories and tracking emissions. And it also includes a direct and indirect support to sources under the small business program, where we have one FTE within DEQ that covers that. Our last action on Title V permit fees occurred in March of 2008. So this was the last rule change. And at that time, that rule change allowed a phase-in of increasing tonnage factor fees for Title V facilities from 2008 through 2011, as shown here on slide number 4. It took us basically from an $18.10 per ton tonnage fee in 2007 up to $22.50 in 2008, and then on up to $30 per ton by January 2011. Since then, our Title V fees have not changed, except for our rules allow an annual increase of our fees via the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. And so since 2011, we've gone from $30 a ton up to $34.25 per ton as of January 1 of this year, again, via those annual CPI adjustments. So let's open up the books and take a look at our Title V revenues, which are shown here on this slide, on slide number 5. The blue trace shows our cash receipts, our Title V receipts since fiscal year 2003. The pink trace with the squares shows our spending level year over year. And the purple line across the bottom half of this graph with the yellow triangles shows our year-end balance for each of the fiscal years. So this is just looking at Title V monies. And so you see also in the middle of the graph the time period that I just referenced when we last adjusted our rules in 2008. And it shows that phase-in of the increasing tonnage fees that occurred in state fiscal years 8 through 11. So a couple notable things here. First, as we were making those prior changes in the phase-in 08 through 11, look what happened to our receipts, the blue trace. The receipts actually went down as we were implementing an increasing tonnage factor fee. That's just a good illustration of how dynamic of a time that was in terms of emissions in North Carolina, and basically an indicator that the emissions went down significantly for a variety of reasons in that time period. Very good story for the environment, certainly one that is a challenge for us in terms of managing the finances of the Title V program. One thing you'll also notice since the last fee change was implemented in, say, 2010 or 2011 or so, the pink trace, and that is our spending level has gone down each year or has been steady each year. And so that's just illustrating that we've been managing the program to basically operate within our means during this time period. And we've made adjustments to the program size-wise over this time period. You can also see that cash receipts have continued to decline over this time period over the last 10 years or so, despite annual CPI increases. And then one other note that's important here, you can kind of see over the last 3 or 4 years that spending outpaced receipts by just a little bit. And that impacted our cash balance to the point where the cash balance at the end of the state fiscal year that just ended on June 30th was 0. So what have we done over this time period? I mentioned our last 10 years, since the last fee change, we've managed and we've either reduced spending or we've held level. Well, when 95+% of your spending is related to salary, the main way to reduce costs is to reduce staffing. And we've done that since 2006 when our agency had 303 positions. We're now down to 209 positions. Only 190 of those are currently filled. Over the same time period, we've done other things to reduce costs. We've made smarter investments. We've worked smarter in terms of wireless technologies at our monitoring sites, which means fewer trips out in the field for our staff. Saves a lot of money. We've transitioned to PM monitoring that's using continuous measurements or continuous instruments. And we've moved away from very labor-intensive filter-based measurements. So that is also saving us money. And then as the number of Title V facilities went down over time, we've been analyzing each and every vacancy and looked at workload every time a position became open. And so that's why we've been able to accomplish this reduction in staffing over time mostly through attrition. Other things have changed since our last fee change, and so we're on slide 7 here. Namely, there's 13% fewer Title V facilities, but there are also a number of other factors that have impacted revenues and workload during this last 10 years. EPA has revised the National Ambient Air Quality Standards for pretty much every criteria pollutant, just about, during this time period. Some of those are noted here on the slide. Some of those came with significantly more monitoring requirements that were put on the state and also onto some of the facilities of certain magnitude. So, that was certainly a big change over the last 10 years that required additional resources. There have also been amendments or new federal regulations put in place, new MAC standards, revised MAC standards, or NSPSs. Some of those are listed here on the slide. Other areas where workload has increased is really in the world of our public participation process for permitting. The public's expectations have gone up drastically, I'd say, certainly in the last 2 or 3 years, but most definitely over the last 10. And so a lot more effort is being put into that to work through the permitting process today. These newer revised MACs and NSPSs, many of those came with increased stack testing requirements. So that means there are more protocols for our staff to be reviewing, there are more test reviews, and there are more observations to do out in the field. I'd be remiss if I didn't say a word about emerging compounds. And while that's not a huge focus of our Title V program, it is certainly true that Title V facilities can emit emerging compounds, and it can put a tremendous drain on the agency to have to respond to those types of situations. I'll also mention personal air sensors. This is also not a big piece, but something that we just need to have an awareness about, and DAQ needs to keep their finger on the pulse of these new, inexpensive technologies that citizens have at their homes. They take them to different places, and so we are often presented with some of that data, which cannot be used for regulatory purposes, but we need to understand what those air sensors are capable of and participate in a process of advancing that technology for our own good. And that is, maybe someday we'll be able to use some of those as a federal equivalent method or a federal reference method for our actual regulatory monitoring purposes. But for now, it's really just getting a handle on what those sensors are capable of. And then permitting workload has been big for us, especially recently. We had double-digit PSD applications in-house as of the time that we created this slide. It's since dipped a little bit below double-digit figures. We've actually started decentralizing some of our Title V permit renewal work to the regional offices, simply to debottleneck some of this workload within our central office. While that helps debottleneck and makes us more efficient and productive as a division, it also spreads out some of the Title V salary liability. And so that's something we have to consider in this process. All right, so let's open up the books a little bit more. You might be wondering, all right, well, what percentage of DAQ's total revenues are made up of Title V fees? And so this shows our state fiscal year 1920 revenues, where Title V fees accounted for about 31% of our total revenues. You'll see that in this chart, that DAQ does not get any general fund appropriations. We are all receipts and grant funded. Pie chart also illustrates a balance between both stationary sources and mobile sources sharing the burden of funding the air program in North Carolina. And that's something that we're very thankful for. So the fuel tax piece in purple and the I&M, that's the Vehicle Inspection and Maintenance Program, in green, combined make up for about 50% of our revenues currently. And that makes sense because, again, the mobile sources contribute to about half of our air pollution. And then you'll see we also get some federal grants. That's the Section 105 and the 103 slices of the pie. And then our non-Title V permitting revenues make up only about 5% of our total revenues. Okay, well, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Brendan Davey to take us through the next set of slides.
All right, good morning. This is Brendan Davey. I'm the supervisor in the Asheville field office, one of the 7 regional offices for the Division of Air Quality. And for the next 6 slides, we're going to dig into how our Title V funding has changed and why. So on this first bar chart, we have our total Title V fees collected over the past 10 years, and it has dropped 27% since 2009, which is about $2.4 million. The blue bar is a combination of our annual fee, which is a combination of our base fee and per ton fee. The orange bar is our permit fees. So we've had a 27% decrease in total funding, but only a 13% loss of our Title V facilities over that time. And at the same time, there was 17% inflation. So moving on to the next slide, we find out one of the major reasons why we've lost a lot of our funding. We've had 57% drop in per ton billing since 2008. And why did this happen? Well, we had the Clean Smokestacks Act, a lot of boiler conversions to natural gas, the Boiler Act and other MAC standards kicked in, new sulfur dioxide standard. So while this is a success for the environment, our budget has taken a hit as a result. We also do expect further reductions over the next 5 years from utilities and other sources as well. So tying our budget to tonnage is not proving sustainable going forward. So on the next slide, we took an interesting look at our annual fees just to see how it's changed for the different sources. So for our top 30 invoices over time, since 2008, we've had a 41% decrease in the funds from the top 30 invoices. But the bottom 100 invoices, we've actually seen a 13% increase. And that's because the bottom 100 are less reliant on tons, and the CPI increases on the base annual fees have subsequently produced an increase in those fees, and the top ones were more reliant on the per ton fee. So looking at the next slide, we'll break out our annual fees into the blue bar, which is the base fee, and then the yellow bar, which is the per ton fee. So the annual invoice you get once a year from the division is the sum of these 2 bars. And then on the side, you'll also pay your permit application fee. So over time, you've seen the base fee part of your annual fee pretty much staying the same as far as our revenue is coming in. There's been CPI increases, but the per ton fee, as you can see and demonstrated on previous graphs, has decreased 38% on the invoices that we received on per ton. Going to the next slide. And you can see a lot of that has been from our electrical generation category, the EGUs, about 2.2 million or 56% drop in the monies received from the EGU category in North Carolina. So that's a major part of the story of the loss of tons and the loss of fees for the division. So moving on to the next slide. So here's a pie chart that's our current Title V funding by source. 4% is coming from permit applications, and the other 2 are combined into your annual invoices. 32% base fee and then 64% on the tonnage fee. Back in 2009, we actually received 75% of our funding from tonnage. We currently have 279 Title V sources. So going forward, we see the tonnage fee is not quite as sustainable with future reductions in tons. And you'll see later on in this presentation that we're targeting down more in the lower 50%, around 50% of our fees coming from tons. So Mike, I'm going to turn it over back to you.
All right, thank you, Brendan. So bringing this slide back, very similar to what we showed back on slide 5. It's really just an expansion of that slide with one additional fiscal year shown, and that's the state fiscal year 21 that just started. So we're in the first month of that fiscal year. So you'll see we have our projected receipts and our projected spending level and our projected balance. You'll note that there's a little bit of new structure in the data here for that projection number for our spending level. And it shows a significant increase in spending this fiscal year in the Title V realm. And so that's a result of an internal review of time and activities that we conducted last year that showed that we were undercharging staff time to the Title V account. So if you focus back on the things that we talked about back on slide 3, that the Clean Air Act and then the implementing regulations in 40 CFR Part 70 say that should be covered by Title V revenues, our internal review of that revealed that we were undercharging percentages of people's time to Title V type activities. And so what that results in, and again, I'll remind you that this internal review hadn't been done for a while for DAQ, but certainly reflects the impacts of many of those federal actions that we discussed back on slide 7. So where the workload has increased, but certainly our revenues have not. And so when you account for the increased spending level that is necessary to conform to 40 CFR Part 70 and Clean Air Act Section 502, it results in a target revenue level of around $8 million. And you can kind of see how that breaks down here. About 7.8 of that is related to salary. About $250,000 is budgeted to DAQ operational and equipment spending. But again, an $8 million revenue target compared to our receipt level in 18-19, which was about 6.4 million, results in about a $1.6 million gap. Now, this revenue target is designed to maintain the level of service that we currently provide to the public and to the regulated community. We are not proposing any expansions, no additional boxes on the org chart. This is simply a maintain the division at its current level of service target. So how does that break down? Since most of our liabilities are related to salary, let's take a look at the Title V full-time equivalents, or FTEs, per program area. And it breaks down as such. Permitting is about 26.7 FTEs, compliance about 25.9, monitoring 21.4, emissions inventory 5.4, other, as shown here in the little breakdown, 8.9. The director's office and business and budget office costs 3.2, and then the aforementioned small business FTE in the department. So it totals up to 92.5 Title V FTEs across the division related to that spending target. Another piece that we want to make sure that we are addressing as we do financial planning for the division is maintaining a strong workforce. And this is really, really important, especially now. And obviously we all always want to create and maintain competitive salaries in every workplace. You know, that's certainly a goal for every employer. It's always been especially challenging in the public sector and for the state. But one additional component to this that really makes my eye twitch when I lay down at night is what I call the DAQ Silver Tsunami, or the class of the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments. We hired a lot of young professionals back after the 90 amendments, you know, in the early to mid 90s. Those young professionals made a career of it in air quality. There are a lot of the heavy lifters that probably many of you interact with every day with regard to your permit or your compliance inspector. But they're nearing the end of their 30-year public sector career. And so they've earned the opportunity to go on and do something else. And so we're investing in young professionals and mid-career people and training them and really hoping that they can become our future leaders within DAQ. But we've got to be able to keep them. And so it's a very competitive job market here in the Triangle in North Carolina. You have the EPA's Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards. Their headquarters is right here in the Triangle. There are many consultants that are here in the Triangle that do work for OAQPS. And then obviously a lot of consultants that do work for many of you, the Title V regulated community as well. So we find ourselves in a very competitive market, even though these are niche type of jobs. Being an air quality engineer or scientist, you know, it's some fairly unique skill sets. You just don't pick people off the street with these skill sets. You work to train them. You make an investment in these employees. But we often find ourselves training future EPA and consulting employees. So this is a critical piece to our overall financial planning process. And so to address it, we've established a single and objective and transparent salary schedule that reduces current or future inequities in comparable occupational groups. It works to remove or prevent pay biases against employees based on differences such as age, gender, race, and ethnicity. And it provides predictability for the employee and the employer. And it's a very simple concept that's based on years of relevant experience, performance, and then percent of a market rate, which is a public sector market rate established by the State Office of Human Resources. So it allows some predictability based on that experience and performance. When you look at our division relative to this salary schedule, again, the salary schedule is illustrated here on this graph with the green dots, green squares. Our employees at their current salaries relative to the market rate for their particular position class are all the blue dots. And it shows quite a concerning picture. It paints quite a concerning picture where it shows most of the blue dots are at or below the salary schedule that we've established. So to fully implement our salary administration policy, it would take $1.3 million to get everybody to the green line. Now, that's not something that we're going to do by waving a magic wand and overnight. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take us chopping away at this incrementally, small percent increases for certain job classes, and then do another job class 6 months later. It's going to take time. But it is absolutely something that we're committed to doing. And so I want to share that with you, that we're making a commitment. I'm sharing that with our staff, that we're making a commitment in them. 44%, or about $580,000 of that additional salary liability would be Title V monies. Okay? And so when you take a look at that and we go back to the spending target or the revenue target that I mentioned earlier, being 8 million or so, and you add that additional $580,000, the revised target revenue level would be $8.6 million. And again, comparing that to the most recent fiscal year that was closed out at the time that we generated this slide, it reveals about a $2.2 million spending gap. All right, so I'm gonna hand it back over to Brendan to take us through what other states are doing.
All right, thanks, Mike. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about now how North Carolina compares to other states in Title V funding, more specifically the Southeast. And then also we're going to go over what are the sources of Title V funding. We have a current model that we've been using for 10 years, but what's being used out throughout the United States, and are there ways we can change? So on to the next slide. In summary, nationwide, all states and locals use a variety of per ton fees. Just about every state is charging a per ton fee, but sometimes it's based on actual emissions or allowable. And then there's base annual fees, whether they be tiered per category, a single fee, a minimum fee, or no base annual fee. Permit application fees, number 3. Some states do hourly review fees. And then kind of a general bin, so there's several a la carte fee options for compliance, annual fees, or per application throughout the United States. So in general, no 2 states or local air programs appear the same. So looking at this table on this slide, this is generally the Southeast. And the Southeast kind of fits a model of mostly per ton fee, a base or minimum fee, and then permit application fees. So North Carolina is near the lowest on the per ton fee at $34.25 per ton. About half of the Southeast have a base or minimum fee. So some states do not have a base annual fee. They just charge the per ton. So Kentucky and Mississippi are relying solely on a per ton fee. In fact, they do not charge a permit application fee. So again, on the right, you'll see, again, the Southeast is kind of divided on permit application fees. About half the states use them, some are limited. So in the Southeast, it's a general mix of these three categories. And the two categories on the left are what you would see in your annual invoice, the sum of your per ton fee and then a base fee. So moving on to the next slide. So how does North Carolina compare on our Title V funding per facility, our total receipts divided by number of facilities? So currently, on that blue bar, you can see on the bottom, the vertical bar, we're at about $23,000 per Title V facility. And based on what Mike stated, our needs going forward, we're targeting around 31,000 per facility. And at the same time, other states in the Southeast are encountering the same issue with reduced funding by reduction in tonnage fees. So Tennessee is proposing to go up as well through their stakeholder process to 33,000 per facility and then up to 38,000 per facility. South Carolina is proposing to go about to the same spot that we're looking at as far as raising fees. But as you can see right now, we're kind of in the lower end of the bin of funding per Title V facility. West Virginia is going through the same process now as well. They called me 2 weeks ago to get an idea about our stakeholder process and what we've worked on. So a lot is going on in the Southeast, and everybody's encountering the same issues of reduced funding, but workload is pretty much staying the same, if not increasing in some respects. So moving on to the next slide. So what are the options out there for Title V fee funding? So the most common options, as I've kind of mentioned, and they're all in use by North Carolina, is an annual base fee, and we're currently at $7,423 in North Carolina. An annual per ton emissions fee, we're at $34.25 per ton in North Carolina, and then permit application fees. And North Carolina has a suite of application fees for greenfield PSD. So we have those three most common options already in play in North Carolina. But what other options are out there? So we did a kind of a search. Looked into a survey by the state of Tennessee, looked into a survey by National Association of Clean Air Agencies, and looked at other states on the web and to see what put everything back on the table. So we had a pretty good model to begin with that we've been using for 20 years, but with the tons going down, relying on per ton fee, we realized that's not sustainable. So what else is out there? So we looked at one option there is charge per ton of hazardous air pollutants, as they do in Colorado. They charge $153 per ton of HAP emissions. Another option is we'll add in a complexity fee. And this is what we've noticed throughout the United States. Some states have taken this step, already have been there, somehow have an increased fee based on the complexity of the facility. And this could be, say in Georgia and Tennessee, you charge more per ton if you're in the EGU category. Or on your annual base fee, say in Georgia, you charge about $2,000 extra if you have NSPS applicable. In West Virginia, your base fee would be higher if you're in a certain category, if you're a utility or, say, a paper mill. And the one we found most intriguing, and Virginia recently changed their fees significantly in the past 2 years. If a facility is subject to 7 or more subparts, the federal NSPS or MAC standards, they're then considered a complex facility, and their annual base fee would be $24,000. So Virginia kind of counts the number of different applicable federal subparts to assess the complexity of a facility. Moving on to Wisconsin, another interesting model is they add in, if you're MAC'd or NSPS, $1,000 to your annual fee, but for EGUs, they charge straight out of the gate $47,000 per year for the EGU category. So the second bullet, there's many different ways to assess the complexity of a facility and maybe charge a little bit more on the annual fees based on the fact that some facilities require more work by the division than others. So moving down to the third bullet, some states have a la carte compliance fees. In Oregon, they charge per ambient monitor that might be regulatory driven, targeted to a specific facility. Some states charge per stack test observation. So there's a way to create a little menu of compliance fees a la carte, and the same thing with permitting fees. Some states charge more if you have modeling submitted with your application. In the state of Alabama, it could be as high as $19,000 for a modeling portion of your application, or going to public notice Or if your application has NSPS applicability or MACT applicability, would your permit application cost more as it does in West Virginia and Alabama? Some states, none in the Southeast, charge hourly processing fees for certain activities, kind of like a consulting firm, logging hours, and then you get a bill later. I think about 7 states I could find, including Delaware, Ohio, and Idaho, use hourly processing fees. The CPI adjustment, just as a note, we do use that in North Carolina. Some states do, some states don't. And are there other options? Yes, some states have removed the 4,000 ton per year cap on assessing the per ton fee. We have a 4,000 ton cap. We did look at that, and that would raise our revenue for 3 to 4 years. But again, with the reduction in tons, that would fade away, and reliance entirely on tonnage is not a sustainable model. So we decided really not to go in that direction. Also to note, in some states, there's with the a la carte permitting fees, it gets complex where you submit your application and you don't know what the fee is until the state reviews the application and gets with you later. So that can add a layer of complexity there. And some states even have a fee manual where to figure out your annual fee, you actually have to read a manual. And that's not, and we'll talk about our stakeholder group later, but we're hoping to keep the model of simplicity in North Carolina, but do make some adjustments. So moving forward, so the options for consideration in North Carolina, based on the stakeholder group that Mike will be talking about a little bit later. So we're looking at, yes, increasing our per ton emissions fee slightly. We're also, second bullet, going to thinking about adjusting our base annual fee. But based on what we saw in other states, and particularly Virginia, we're thinking of addressing the complexity concept and adding in on the annual base fee for facilities 2 complexity tiers if you're moderately complex or a highly complex facility, counting the number of federal programs applicable to your facility. So if you have several different MAC standards and NSPS standards applicable to your facility, your annual base fee might be slightly higher than it would otherwise for another type of facility. And then on our permit application fees, we consulted with our permits group and went over the amount of work involved with different types of applications. And we have a variety of fees for Greenfield and PSD, but the ones we targeted were the minor modification fee, increasing it from its $900.88 now, and then also increasing the significant modification fee. We'll talk about this more later. And then a pet peeve of mine, I don't know if this will get approved, eliminating the ownership change fee of $60, which in my opinion, the time to cut a check, cash a check, and all the people involved, we've spent more than $60. Hopefully we can eliminate that. So moving on, I'm going to go over each of these 3 bullets on the next few slides. So on increasing our per ton fee, this is a bar chart of the Southeast. And again, North Carolina is at near the bottom of the per ton fee. And I have a range of consideration under there. We're actually considering $40 per ton. So the bottom part of that range at this time, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So keeps us in the lower end of the pack in the Southeast on per ton fee. And the reason our per ton fee can be low is because we're a little bit stronger on the base fees. And again, as we said, relying on tons going forward is not sustainable. And I think we're setting ourselves up pretty good by not increasing the per ton fee a whole lot. Moving on to the next slide. Kind of shows what I'm saying about here about the billable tons. So we already had a 57% decrease in tons billed since 2009, but we did some projections, consulted with Duke Energy and a few other big players in North Carolina that have high emissions that are putting on controls or have put on controls. So our projections for tons based on our best estimates, we're going to have a reduction in billable tons another 17% by 2025 billable year, which is actually 2023 calendar year emissions. So again, reinforcing the fact that the billing model needs to change slightly away from the reliance on tons. Again, we're not as strongly relied on tons as say Kentucky or Mississippi, where 100% of their funding comes from the per ton fee. So we talked about tweaking the per ton fee. I also mentioned the complexity concept. And here's a good example of why we're considering adjusting our fees on the annual basis slightly to take into account the different complexity of different types of facilities and air emission sources. So on the left example is a bakery, which is a Title V facility, making English muffins, bread, hot dog buns, mostly ethanol emissions. So no HAP emissions, very little, but a fair amount of VOC emissions, 166 tons. No federal NSPS regulations, no MAC standards, not subject to 112R, no air pollution control devices on site, simply uncontrolled baking lines, and only 4 permit applications in the last 10 years. The bakery's annual invoice is $12,800. Compare that to example 2. The bakery has a 50% higher fee than the chemical plant. And these are live examples. The chemical plant's paying $8,000 per year, but let's go down the chemical plant's list here. They have 17 tons of VOCs. Okay, relatively low VOCs, but a fair amount of HAP emissions, hazardous air pollutants, at almost 10 tons. But NSPS, 4 new source performance standards applicable, 9 MAC standards applicable. Most of these are the SOCME, Synthetic Organic Chemical Manufacturing Industry MAC standards. Subject to 112R for risk assessment, risk management, accidental release for formaldehyde and ammonia, and several different air pollution control devices. One I've never seen, an acid scrubber, pack bed scrubbers, boiler control, fabric filtration. And so the chemical plant takes a significant more amount of time invested in the division for permitting, for compliance, all the parametric monitoring, the records, and yet it's the bakery's currently paying 50% more than the chemical plants. This is kind of driving home the complexity issue and what we're trying to adjust and why we're trying to adjust in that direction. So say on the next slide, if we were to count the number of these federal programs and how many facilities have that count, and what we're thinking of creating 2 different tiers. So if you have 0 to 2 federal programs applicable, you would be considered a regular facility, whereas we have a moderately complex tier and a highly complex tier. So about 129 facilities fall into the count of 3 to 6 federal programs applicable, and each of those programs requires more record keeping, more monitoring, things like that. Some programs are different. And then for 7 and above, which is Virginia kind of classified theirs into just one tier. You're either highly complex or you're not. We're attempting to go with more of a moderate complex tier in the middle, and then highly complex if you're 7 programs or above. So that's kind of the breakdown of how many facilities would fall into these categories for a slight adjustment in the annual base fee. So on to the next slide. So we do recognize that not all these federal programs are created equal. You can call these complexity beans, complexity units. You have some simpler regulations. An emergency engine subject to MAC 4Z, required just to do oil changes. Or an SPS subpart 000. A little bit on the simpler side, but then on the other side, you've got some of these complexity beans or regulations require a lot of work and might have SIMs involved, parametric monitoring, further review of our central office staff for some of these comms, things like that. We do understand that not all these beans are created equal, and we did consider weighing these beans or these complexity units, you could say, but we're thinking that the tiered approach and having a certain threshold you have to reach before you're actually charged more on your annual invoice might resolve the fact that we're acknowledging the difference in these complexity units. So we talked about complexity. Let's move on to what we're thinking about doing with our permit application fees. And so looking at our current permit application fees, the 2 that we want to adjust primarily are minor modification and significant modification, currently at $988. And on the right, as I said, some states do not charge a dime for permit application fees, and some states do. We're kind of in the middle. For the states that do charge, we're on the lower end. Georgia is now at $2,000. They're transitioning to $4,000 for a minor modification fee. So we're thinking of bumping our minor mod and significant modification fees up as well, kind of matching some surrounding states. And those actual numbers will be presented a little bit later. So now we're going to move on to Mike. It's kind of going to go over our stakeholder process, the people we involved, and where we ended up. Okay, back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Brandon. So yes, so we absolutely formed a Title V permit fee stakeholder focus group earlier this year. And when we first got together with this group, we set some goals. And we initially at DAQ indicated that we would present the data, be very transparent, present the issue via all the historical and projected revenues, and show them what's been done in other states, all just like what we've just done with you. We all agreed that we would allow the stakeholder group, focus group to develop and explore various options and solutions, and DAQ would listen and consider to all options that were provided. A goal was to make, or have the stakeholder group make a recommendation that DAQ could take on to the Air Quality Committee of the Environmental Management Commission for initiation of the rulemaking process. We also established a goal of keeping it simple, and you've heard Brendan refer to that already, while keeping our division's mission and service and people in mind, but absolutely providing certainty and simplicity to the regulated community. So let's keep it simple. We also established a goal with the stakeholder group to go through this process as infrequently as possible and craft a viable solution that sustains as long as the projection input data is reliable. And DAQ offered a blank sheet of paper if desired to the stakeholder group, but ultimately the stakeholder group was provided with a funding model or spreadsheet that they could then kind of play around with various options to use, adjust, edit. The model had all of the requisite input data that was necessary to explore various options. And so that was kind of the start of our stakeholder focus group process. We are very thankful for all of the people that participated in that process, as shown here on the slide. We had 4 Title V permit holders. We had a consulting firm that does work for Title V facilities in North Carolina. We had an environmental attorney that does work for Title V facilities in North Carolina. We had the president of the North Carolina Manufacturers Alliance. Many of their members are Title V facilities. And we had 2 representatives from non-government organizations. I just want to say thank you to this group of folks. They really rolled their sleeves up. They invested a good amount of time in constructing the proposal that we're going to share with you today. There were 4 meetings of this group in May and June. Each of them were about 2 hours in length. They were all virtual meetings, just like this one here today, webinar type format. It was very active participation. They asked lots of questions of the division as we presented a lot of the background information that we've shared with you so far today. We had to do a lot of follow-up. We shared a lot of data. We listened. We were considering all options that were presented to us. The group asked us early on to bring some 5-year projections to the table. Brendan showed you what some of that emissions data looks like going out to 2023 through 2025 or so. But the stakeholder group absolutely said, yeah, we need to be looking at solutions that are going to last, and let's just make sure we're capturing the fact that emissions are going to decrease over time. So that was something the division brought back to the group as part of this process. Ultimately, by the end of the 4th meeting, there were key tenets and there was a proposal presented, and these are some of the key tenets of the proposal. The first point was something you've already heard us speak to over the course of this presentation. That is, we've got to rely less on the tonnage fee moving forward. Doing so, if we continue to rely heavily on the tonnage fee, it will not be a sustainable model, and we'll be right back at this process sooner than what we would all like. There was also a key tenet to link fees more to workload, and this is where the complexity fee is now introduced. There was an ask to phase in over 3 years that additional amount that's needed for implementation of our division's salary administration plan. And that's something that DAQ agreed to. The fourth key tenet was an ask of mainly of the industrial representatives of the stakeholder group, but ultimately something that we all agreed to, and that is for our division to conduct an accountability report over the next 2 years to include a new workload analysis and staffing and funding needs. This is something that really workload and staffing and funding needs is something that is a bit of a continuous process, right, in our division, given our diverse revenue streams. And so this is absolutely something that the division is committed to doing and producing for the regulated community and for the public. And the fifth key tenet of the stakeholder group proposal was for DAQ to manage cash flow in order to address legislative increases. I mentioned earlier, DAQ does not get a dime in terms of general fund appropriations from the General Assembly. So when the General Assembly, like they've done each of the last 2 years, provides and authorizes an increase, a salary increase for state employees, it's been a 2.5% increase each of the last 2 fiscal years, then it's up to DAQ to manage its revenues in order to fulfill what's been authorized. No additional monies come to DAQ when those legislative increases are authorized. And so the stakeholder group said, DAQ, manage your cash flow in order to address that. Okay, so let's move on to the proposal. So a lot of information on this slide, so we'll go through it pretty deliberately, but I'll ask you to focus on the column that's labeled proposal for 2021, kind of that grayish blue column. That's the proposal that would appear in rule text that would be presented to the Air Quality Committee for consideration. And so we can compare that proposal to the current fee structure, which is the column just to the left. That's the white column labeled current 2020. So we'll walk through it just briefly. The annual fee, base fee, goes from $7,400 up to $10,000. The tonnage fee up to $40 per ton. Minor modifications and significant modifications. Again, these are these permit application fees where the existing fee absolutely does not cover the expenses associated with DAQ processing those applications. So the minor modification fee would go up to $3,000. The significant modification, Title V modification, go up to $7,000. And then there's the introduction of the complexity fee, as explained by Brendan earlier. The moderately complex fee would add $2,500 to the annual fee. And the highly complex fee for greater than 7 federal programs being applicable would be a $7,500 fee added on to the annual fee. This proposal, if implemented over a full year, would result in a total fees received of $8.4 million. Okay, so that's in between the initial base target and short of the target that includes DAQ's salary schedule and salary administration plan. We're also providing some projections, and I'll go through that briefly with you. The projections for 2022 through 2025, the right-hand part of the table here, I'll call your attention to the total fees received line across the bottom. And you can kind of see how that goes up in 2022 to 8.6 million, so it's around that target level in 2022 and 2023, and then it starts to decline in 2024 and 2025. The only reason that those numbers change from 2022 through 2025 is an application of what we're assuming the annual CPI adjustment will be based off of the 2021 proposal, and our projections of what the emission reductions will look like over time. And so you can kind of see there in 2022 and 2023, the CPI increases went out, but starting in 2024 through 2025, the emission reductions overwhelm any CPI increases that are assumed in these calculations. I'll note that the blue column, again, that's the proposal, the blue column for 2021. That's what you would actually see in rule text, draft rule text. This is that stakeholder group's unanimous recommendation, and it also represents DAQ's recommendation. And ultimately, the division believes that this is an appropriate and necessary amendment to our fee structure. It ensures that we're going to comply with Section 502(b)(3) of the Clean Air Act and implementing regulations in 40 CFR Part 70. Okay, so we're coming down the home stretch here. So what does our schedule look like? Well, we presented this exact presentation to the Air Quality Committee and the Environmental Management Commission at their July meeting earlier this month, just as a rule concept. There were no actions taken. This was not an action item. This was simply teeing this up as a concept to share with them what the division will be bringing forward later. We noted our stakeholder process to them, and we noted that there would be further outreach to the regulated community, and that is what that important step is taking place here today. We will absolutely continue to provide outreach to the regulated community throughout this process and provide updates as the process evolves. At this point, it is the division's hope to take rule text, again, with that column, the prior slide with the proposal for 2021 fees, take that rule text and a fiscal note to the Air Quality Committee at their September meeting. We are still uncertain, but it's possible that at the September meeting of the Environmental Management Commission that it's possible that we could proceed to a request to proceed to public hearing if they determine that it is a pathway that they would like to take in September. If not, then that would be occurring in the November meeting, which would set up a public process that is 60 days in length, where the public and any interested party can provide written comments to the record. There would also be an opportunity to comment at a public hearing with regard to that rule change. And so depending on how that September-November step goes, we would be looking at an EMC final action anywhere from January to May of 2021, which would mean that rule could become effective sometime in the spring of 2021. I noted earlier, much earlier in the presentation, that our balance went to zero at the end of the fiscal year that was completed on June 30th. And so at this point, we are surviving on this account, invoice by invoice. And so there's no cash balance in reserve for us as we start this fiscal year. So that is the end of our presentation. We thank you very much for your patience and your attention. We took about an hour there to go through the slides, but we are certainly going to make ourselves available for questions. And I think both Michael and Rahat have been monitoring the chat room for questions. We encourage you to put your questions in there, and we can go through those, and we can also open up some lines to take some questions. So I'll hand it back over to Michael and Rahat.
Great, thanks, Mike. So yes, we have received a couple of questions. One question in the chat that was directed to me was, I assume the state does not receive any funding from the EPA. And the state does receive funding from the EPA, and we do have a couple of other revenue streams. I would suggest if you want to review the presentation, Mike's getting up there. I think it's slide 8, Mike. There we go. So these are the funding streams that come from, one, the federal government through our grants, the Section 105 and 103 grants. We do have a percentage of funding that comes from non-Title V facilities, the 5%. Fuel tax, we get a tiny fraction of the fuel tax associated with every gallon of gas sold, but that adds up to a big chunk of our funding revenue. But it is just a small fraction of that penny that, one of the pennies that's charged. And then we also get a small fraction of the inspection fees in the counties that require emission inspections on vehicles. We get a small percentage of that. The remainder of it, the 31% for the Title V funding, that's required again through the Clean Air Act. Any of our activities that are associated with Title V facilities, any of the work associated with that, not just permitting, but the compliance work associated with it, inspections that we do, all the reports that you have to submit, that we have to review, source testing that we go out on, and then also, a lot of the administrative work, as well as the ambient monitoring, where those pollutants can really be tied back to Title V facilities. All that work is summed together and has to be funded per the Clean Air Act out of the Title V fees collected. So that was really the function, the focus of the funding, proposed funding changes that we're addressing today. Let's see. We received another question, and this entire presentation in the email that I sent to you a couple of weeks ago, as well as the update I sent yesterday, at the bottom of it, you'll find a link to the Environmental Management Commission's website. And on that site, it goes directly to the meeting from July. There is a link at the bottom that takes you directly to this presentation. So if you want to review it on your own, you can access it that way. Okay, so we have a few other questions. Let's see. So we got a question. What is the plan B if this is not approved? Mike, would you like to touch on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, well, Plan B, if this is not approved, so, well, we'd be looking at clearly not being able to meet our obligations under the Clean Air Act. We would be doing the best that we can with the revenues that come in, and so I think at this point you'd be looking at we'd be looking at either ways to reduce staffing, which would reduce the level of service that we're providing to the regulated community and the level of service we're providing to the public. I can't really predict what EPA's response would be, but I think they would be interested in that matter as well.
Great, thank you, Mike. So we had another question, and real quick, what I'm going to do is ask Rahat to explain to everybody that is on the call how they can raise their hand, and once we go through the questions that have been typed into the chat, we'll see if anybody has raised their hand to provide a comment. Rahat?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So you can use a raise of hand feature to indicate that you have a question. And for the callers who have called in by telephone only, to raise your hand, you can press *3 to indicate that you have a question. And after your question has been asked, I would recommend that you press *3 again to unraise the hand. That way we can keep track of who and take the next question. So that's pretty much all I have. Thank you.
Yep, great. Okay, thank you, Rahat. So the next question that we received was, is the 4,000 ton per year cap per pollutant still retained? And what that refers to is a statutory requirement that as the Division of Air Quality collects tonnage fees, no one facility would have to pay a tonnage fee once the tonnage from that facility for a specific pollutant goes over 4,000 tons. And that cap is still in place. It's a statutory requirement. We did take a look at whether that was something we wanted to address. The population of facilities that are subject to that are reducing drastically, and there's only a handful left. Mike may have the exact number. So we deemed that trying to address that through a statutory change that could take quite a bit of time probably wasn't the best best expense of our time, and then also one of the things that we're trying to do is move away from the tonnage fee anyway. So, Mike, do you have an idea of the number of facilities that are above the 4,000 ton cap? I know we've discussed that over the past month or so.
This is Brendan. It's only 2 to 3 facilities right now, and over the next 2 to 3 years, they will all be below the 4,000 ton cap.
Great,
Yep.
thank you.
That's right. So in summary, yeah, you guys nailed it. You know, it's a pretty heavy lift to make that change in the statute for very little gain in the long run. So we left that idea behind in this concept, in this process.
Okay, so I've gotten a couple of additional questions about can we get the slides to review outside the meeting? Again, if you take a look at the email that was sent, at the bottom of it, it has a link to the EMC website that contains the slides. And later on today, I may send that out again, a more direct link to that slideshow. Let's see. And there's a question, can we see slide 38 again? So Mike, can you go to slide 38? Okay. And we'll leave this slide up for now and see if we get any additional questions. Next one is the complexity fee an annual fee or a one-time fee? And Brendan, you want
Yeah,
to
so the
that?
complexity fee would just be an add-in to your annual fee every year. So it's your annual fee right now is a base fee plus your per ton fee, and then that limited population would also have another add-in for moderately complex or highly complex. So it would be in your annual invoice, and not just a one time. It would be repeating every year on your billing anniversary date.
Great, thank you. The next question that we have is, what is the reason the higher tonnage fee for HAPs and possibly TAPs did not continue through the process decisions? Mike and Brendan, you want to address that?
Well, we actually put that out there and put it in this model we developed. We wanted to make the model have all the options in there, and the stakeholder group could, and we had the tons of HAPs emitted statewide, and they could have put in numbers and tweak it. We are already charging for the criteria pollutants, and there's a lot of overlap of the pollutants. And if you start charging for HAPs, you're kind of addressing the complexity concept. HAPs tend to have more work via the MAC standards, and I think I don't recall the direct conversation of why it wasn't pursued, but by pursuing the number of federal programs, and particularly the MAC standards, you are kind of in a way charging for the HAP via the work required to manage that HAP on our side via compliance and permitting and monitoring, record keeping, all that. Mike, do you have any other recollection of why they didn't go further with that? It's not a very common option in the United States. I mean, Colorado is one of the few states I could find that was doing that, but it is an interesting concept, and we laid it out there. But any other input, Mike?
Yeah, Brendan, I think you summarized it very well. I do recall, there being some potential complexity related to just the bookkeeping of VOCs versus HAPs, and not making sure we're not double counting there. But yeah, for the most part, it was decided to kind of leave that idea behind.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just a quick time check. It is 10:14, so we do have several more minutes to go. I do see one person with their hand raised, John Rogers. So, Mr. Rogers, we'll address you in just a second. We have a few more comments that have come in through the chat. So the next one is, since North Carolina has a two-step permitting process, are you not collecting permit application fees at both steps? Any analysis on how many applicants follow two-step process and essentially pay double application fees versus those who go through the one-step process?
Yeah, this is Brendan. I'll take this one. So by raising the significant modification fee to $7,000, at the same time we're going to have only payment at the first step. There will no be kind of double charging per application. So you pay on the first step, and then the second step will be free, kind of embedded in the fee payment for the first step. Our 3-year average of one-step applications are 17 significant mods, and then the 3-year average of two-step significant mods are 31. And again, for those 31, we will only charge for the first step. Previously they were charged $988 for each step. Now they'll just be charged $7,000 right at the beginning, and kind of simplify the check writing process.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brendan. Another question we had, can you walk through a complex permit to explain how you determine the number of complex items?
Sure. Can we go through lunch on this one?
Only if you're buying, Brendan.
So fortunately, our databases have been set up pretty well for the past 10 plus years, 15 years on. We've been tracking through permit issuance and through inspections and double checking what applicable regulations are in these permits and making sure they're in our database. So fortunately, I was able to extract the data pretty easily via a report on these program counts per facility. And that's how we're kind of assessing complexity via hitting different tiers. So the first few program counts, if you're only subject to 1 or 2, or maybe even 0 federal regulations, there would be no add-in for complexity on your annual fee. But from 3 to 6 programs, say you're subject to a MACT 4.0, and then you might have an emergency engine subject to 4Z, and a few other regulations thrown in, maybe 112R. That gets you to the tier of 3 to 6 to have a slight bump in your annual fee. And then the top 29 facilities, and I think the number is actually 32, the slide's slightly outdated, with 7 or more, that's quite a bit of different and varied federal regulations adding in. And these are your steel mills, your paper mills, your EGUs. You're just scanning those 29 to 32 facilities. They are quite the time consumers and quite a bit of different regulations. So that's kind of how we're assessing. And we mentioned how each regulation is not created equal. Some are more difficult to manage, both on the facility level and on our side. And some are easier, and that's why we created these tiers to kind of address that maybe that discrepancy.
Okay, great, thank you. I had another question. When would permit application fee changes be effective? What year would the tonnage and base fee changes be effective?
Yep, so I'll take this one. This is Mike. Really, we're trying to predict schedule of the rulemaking as best we can, as shown here on this slide. So you're looking at a potential final EMC action sometime in early 2021, which means the rule will be effective about 2 months after that. So that's why we've only been able to predict spring-ish of 2021. So we're looking at invoices that are due after the rule effective date is when the proposed changes or whatever is adopted by the EMC would ultimately kick in.
Great, thank you, Mike. Rahat, I'm just trying to follow the order that we received comments in. I saw that Mr. John Rogers had his hand raised earlier. It's down now. I'm not sure if that was inadvertent. Would you mind turning on his mic to see if he still has a comment?
Hey, hey, John, your mic has been unmuted. You can make a statement if you need to.
Yay, yay, yay. Maybe I missed it. Anyway, this is John Rogers with Google at the facility in Winter, North Carolina. And it might have been mentioned, but is the presentation going to be available to be sent out to us?
Yeah, so this is Michael again, and it is. So we'll provide a link directly to the PowerPoint presentation. We may post it as a PDF just to reduce size. And then this webinar is being recorded, and as soon as we're able to process it, we will post it and provide a link for it as well. So thank you for that question. Okay, next question. We've got a couple other questions associated with the complexity, so let me see if I can group them together. One of them is, are complexity programs strictly federal programs, i.e. NSPS, each applicable MACT, PSD, etc.? And the next one is the complexity fee only applicable to the annual fee, or does it also apply to modifications?
So yeah, this is Brendan. The complexity programs are each NSPS, each MACT. If you're subject to PSD, that would be one unit. Subject to 112R, that would be 1 unit. But for NSPS, you count each of your applicable programs, not including the general provisions and not substantial portions of the NSPS. And then also Part 61 NESHAPs. There's about 10 to 15 facilities that we would sum in. Mostly sewage, sludge, incinerators have some unique requirements under Part 61. So counting up all those subparts for NSPS, Part 61, MACT, and then one count for a PSD applicability 112R would be your summation, and then see where you fall in your tiers. And this complexity fee is only on your annual fee. We looked at doing this a la carte in the permit modifications like some other states, and we already have a variety of application fees, kind of a distribution from greenfield to PSD to minor mod to significant mod. So we decided not to overlay. I mean, there's already kind of addressed the complexity via those concepts, and we decided not to overlay the a la carte side of adding in NSPS and MACT into the application fee. So the complexity is, at this time, we're proposing just addressing it on the annual, adding in the 2 tiers on your annual fee.
Great, thank you, Brendan. We received another comment. What about charging for CO2 and other greenhouse gases?
Yeah, this is Mike. Thank you for that question. It's actually a question that Commissioner Vandervaart brought up during the presentation to the Environmental Management Commission. And, it's something that the stakeholder group and focus group discussed maybe very briefly, but we really didn't focus on it that much. At this point, the Title V workload related to GHGs, and specifically those that are related to the workload that's related to regulatory requirements, isn't all that great at this time, but I think it's something that we're obviously going to have to keep our eye on in the future. But during this go around and this process for revising fees, we decided that we didn't need to go that direction, but something we probably all need to be giving some thought to in the future. And I think there's going to be a lot more spirited discussion on that topic in the future amongst air agencies across the U.S. That are all going to struggle as emissions profiles go down, but the workload is maintained.
Okay, we've received another question on the complexity. What are the proposed annual fee increases for each level of complexity? Sorry if I missed it. So can we go back to that slide, Mike?
think slide 38.
There we go.
So yeah, the complexity fee add-in for being moderately complex on this blue column would be $2,500 added into the base of 10,000, and then if you're highly complex, you'd be adding in $7,500 onto the 10,000 base annual fee. Now, Virginia, which is kind of part of our inspiration for this model, they're highly complex facilities at $23,000 or $24,000. So ours would be 10 plus 7.5, so 17.5. So those are the two tier add-ins.
Okay. Let's see, and quick time check, 10:25. So I want to honor everybody's time. We got about 5 more minutes. Received another comment. How about a graduated scale on dollars per ton fee based on the pollutant, such as PM 2.5 has a higher fee than PM 10, NOx has a higher fee than VOC. That would help the bakery. That was the comment.
That's an interesting concept. So let us just take note of that and yeah, give that some further thought. Thank you for that thought and comment. One other thing I'll mention, as you all may think of other things or have additional questions, I encourage any of you to reach out to us. I've pulled up our contact information again. Give us a call. Call me, email any of the three of us here on the screen. We'd love to hear from you, especially in the next 30 days or so in the lead up to the Air Quality Committee meeting in September. So if you have thoughts or you have specific comments, or you just want to pick up the phone and talk, I'd really encourage y'all to reach out to us here in the next 30 days or so by the end of August. Would really love to hear from you. So thank you all. Thank you for that.
Great. Okay, so it is 10:27, doing a last scan of all the participants. I'm not seeing any hands raised at this time, and I think we've addressed all the questions that have come in through the chat. So unless there's any last minute hand raising or questions, Mike, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Well, again, I'll just emphasize one more time how much I appreciate all of your time this morning. And Michael has repeated several times how the slides can be found and referenced. And again, we'd like to hear from you. If you have concerns, we'd like to hear about them. If you have other ideas, we'd like to hear about them. Please give us a call or email us, any of the three of us shown here on the screen. The next 30 days will be critical. I certainly want to hear as much feedback as possible in the next 30 days. Obviously, this is a pre-official comment period, so it's just more of talking through those ideas, questions, or concerns before we really get into the meat of the rulemaking process. So without anything further, we'll say good day and thank you for your time. We'll be in touch. Thank you.